What's going on, airsofters of the internet? Jake with Airsoft Parts, been back with another video. Today we're going to be covering something a little unique. I recently reached out to evic.com and basically laid out that I'm looking for a gun that will allow me to install as much TM compatible parts as possible with very little mods and offer good performance values due to something new I'm coming out on the website. It's going to be a builds guide similar to like, let's say, for example, PC Part Picker, where they have pre-build guides to show you, let's say you want to run a certain game, here's some parts that will run this game the best. Now, my idea is essentially, instead of a game, it's going to be what performance are you looking to achieve, and then look for your performance on the build guide, and there will be a parts list that is recommended to achieve that specific performance. So I reached out and I said, hey, can I get my hands on one of these King Arms EMG Block 2s? They seem to fit my bullet points very well here. And they said, yeah. So they sent me out this EMG King Arms Block 2. It's officially licensed by Colt and Down Defense through EMG. And I'm doing a little bit of a voiceover here because I used a nice camera to record, but it doesn't have good audio. So what comes in the box is essentially the gun, a licensing card, and a OEM magazine. Let's take a look at the card first. The card is a nice thick card. It does have the official licensing emblem or seal to show that it's a genuine product, similar to when you buy like a baseball hat and it comes with a reflective sticker that nobody seems to like to take off, but that's showing that it's a genuine EMG product. It does have a QR code that you can scan, and it just takes you to the EMG Arms website. It doesn't seem to take you to any instructions or any type of registration of your product, but nonetheless, it does take you to the EMG Arms website, and you can find some more history about the company and just what EMG has to offer as well. Right here, I take the magazine out. The magazine, it feels flimsy in my hands, but it does have a nice construction to it, as in like it's got a texturing on the outside, almost like a PMag, so it does feel good and familiar if you already run PMags. The one thing that I did find very frustrating the most is the top hatch for the loading the BBs into the reservoir. You have to like pull it towards you and flick it at the same time for it to open. It's not like the typical high cap mag where you just slide a trapdoor open and then slide it closed and it clicks closed. This is kind of like some weird spring loaded retention system, and it is a little difficult unless you have nails to dig into the groove and kind of flick it up. It's not as easy as pulling on it and manually pulling up. You kind of have to pull it towards you and pull up at the same time, similar to like you're opening a soda can. And it's a little difficult. You will get used to it after a couple times. I was messing with it for a little bit and I got kind of used to it, but it is one of my pet peeves of I wish it was a little bit more easier to get to. Nonetheless, you're probably going to use mid caps anyways, so the magazine is good for what comes with the gun. It's not going to be fancy or anything like that. It's a good magazine out of the box. And it does have a locking bolt with a functional bolt release. The hop-up unit seems to be rotary, but we'll dig into that later when we get into the internal section. And from looking at the Dean's plug on the back, it does have a MOSFET, or a simple MOSFET, but we'll look into that more when we get into the internals. Now, with this being an EMG product, it is going to come with the EMG Alpha Crane stock. These are actually nice stocks because they fit pretty big size batteries. If you remove the rear plate by just pinching two little retention clamps, you pinch those together and it will release the rear plate. It'll expose the Dean's plug, and it will show that you could fit either a butterfly type down each tube, or you can fit a stick type down the buffer tube. I actually did try using some batteries I had on hand to see which one worked the best. I used a 7.4 3000 milliamp Titan power battery. I used a 2600 milliamp 11.1 Titan power battery. followed by a Matrix tri-panel 2000 milliamp 11.1 battery. And I honestly found that the Matrix battery fit the best when it came to fitting an 11.1. That's mostly because I was able to fit 2 down the tube on each side and then a 1 down the buffer tube while still packing the wires in pretty tight and closing the butt plate and it clipping in place. The one thing I did find that didn't work very well was the Titan Power 11.1. The battery profile itself seems a little long, so it does fit down the side tubes, but the one thing that I was finding, or I was very cautious about, was that when I was closing the plate to hold everything in, the top section of the battery where the wire sticks out to plug into the gun, it was just a hair longer than the cover for the butt plate would cover. So I was afraid that if I were to put the butt plate on and force it down, it would crush the wires or break the solder joint off of the wire where it meets the cell. And I didn't want to risk that. So I just went ahead with the 11.1, the Matrix 11.1, the butterfly, or the tri-panel. That one seemed to work the best. The 7.4 worked as well if you slid it down the buffer tube. I had the same issue sliding it down the side of the stock. It was having the wires stick out too far, and I was afraid that I was going to crush it by closing the plate. So here I did some performance testing. I went ahead and used a 11.1 LiPo and a 7.4. The first test is going to be using the 7.4. It's going to show the FPS and the RPS I was getting. Now, I was using 2.5s for the testing, so the FPS might be a little lower than what the gun would actually get with 2.0s. So with the 7.4, you're getting about an average of 10 RPS with an average of 372 with 2.5s. Now the FPS is converted to 2.0s. That's going to be around 415 or 1.6 joules. Now the next test was done using a Titan Power 11.1. I was getting about 14.8, 15 RPS as the average with an average of 366 FPS with a 2.5. That converts to about 409 with a 2.0 or 1.5 joules. All right, so now that we went over some of the externals and did a little performance review and got some numbers, let's go ahead and dig into the internals. So it's pretty much a standard version 2 gearbox and long motor, but the reason I like this gun so much is the internals that come with it from the factory. So we'll take the upper off and we'll start digging into the internals. We'll start with the upper first. Inner barrel and hop-up unit. It's going to be a brass inner barrel. The length looks like 363 all the way to the end of the 14.5-inch barrel. So yeah, probably going to be 363. The hop-up itself is a rotary style hop-up. The hop-up is similar to a Pro-Win hop-up. It's got the clip that holds the wheel on. The wheel has an O-ring underneath it that give it retention, and the arm is kind of on the smaller side in there. The bucking itself, hard to tell, but it's probably 70-degree bucking rated for 400 FPS. Let me see if I can get a shot of that in there. So you can see where the nub is protruding a little bit. So it was hopping 2.8s pretty fine. I think it'll be good for heavier BBs as well, but you do want to keep in mind the barrel length to the cylinder. We'll get into the cylinder next, but the hop-up unit itself, I would honestly upgrade the inner barrel and the bucking. The hop-up unit itself is probably fine stock. I say this about all guns, essentially, is that the stock hop-up unit works just fine. I would only replace it if you literally break this. People that want to install max models and retro arms and Pro-Wins and gate hop-up units now, like, it's cool because it adds like a flashy kind of sense to it, but it's not necessarily a performance enhancer. It's really just a nice replacement. The real accuracy improvements come from the bucking the nub and the barrel the most. So that's what I would do first if I was going to do any type of upgrade to the accuracy setup for this gun. But stock overall, very basic, but very efficient. I think it works great stock. I haven't had any issues with it underhopping or inconsistency issues. So I would keep it stock if you're on a budget when it comes to upgrading. So getting into the lower receiver, we're starting to get into the gearbox now. We'll do step one, which is remove the buffer tube and get into the rear of the receiver. So to do that, it's pretty simple. Just use a long Phillips screwdriver. You could use a flashlight and aim it down there to get a better alignment, but I'm just kind of going by feel. So once you get that loose, mind the wire, or actually when you get that loose, what you want to do, I like to just tip it upside down, and here's the retaining screw with the washer or the plate. Set to the side, pull that off, and here's the buffer tube and stock all together. So we'll put this to the side. Now when you remove the rear receiver plate, it'll allow you to move the wires out of the way, and it will also give you access to the simple MOSFET that comes with this gun. I believe this just offers voltage protection. There's no active braking, any type of programmability. It's just simply to help regulate voltage from the battery to the motor, and essentially to the motor to the gun. Now during my shooting test, there was an issue where I went from a 7.4 to an 11.1, and when I swapped from a 7.4 to 11.1, there was something called double cycling, which double cycling is when you have the gun on semi and you pull the trigger once and the gun cycles twice. Now that was immediately after I unplugged the 7.4 and plugged the 11.1, and that is normal in my opinion because it corrected itself about 2 or 3 shots in, and that's probably because the MOSFET was starting to realize that there was more voltage coming through, so it had to do a little bit more voltage regulation compared to using the 7.4. Another thing too that was happening when I was doing the initial rate of fire and FPS testing was that when I would be on full auto and I would hold the trigger down, it would kind of fluctuate in terms of, I don't know if you want to call it voltage supply or amp supply from the battery to the motor, but it was kind of fluctuating in terms of it would start off nice and fast and then it would slow and then pick back up and slow and pick back up. Now, I'm not sure if that has something to do with the MOSFET itself, trying to figure out how to regulate the voltage on full auto, or if it was the trigger contacts themselves not making a good contact and kind of creating resistance, because if you create resistance, it's going to affect the performance of the gun. Not sure. We'll keep digging into the gun and see what the trigger contacts look like. If not, then this is a good example of why you might want to swap over to a better MOSFET, like an optical MOSFET, Gate Aster, Gate Titan, Jeftron, Perun. Those do a way better job of being more consistent in terms of voltage controls, and also they're more consistent when it comes to providing the necessary amps and the correct amps to the gun and being consistent about it. So we'll dig in still more. Right off the bat, I noticed that this does have a quick change spring from right here. It's not a true quick change spring. You still have to remove the buffer tube to be able to get to it. At least you're able to remove the spring guide with the gearbox still inside the gun. Now, like for example, a Crytac, you'd have to remove the gearbox from the receiver. If you just remove this one long screw with this plate and you remove the buffer tube, you get easy access to this. You're going to want to use a flat head. So you push it in, and you want to be careful when releasing it because sometimes the screwdriver could slip and this will shoot out. So now the spring guide, it's got a nice good weight to it. It does feel to be steel. Let's do a test. Yep. So this is a steel spring guide. It looks to be a cap on top of this sleeve that holds the ball bearings in place. Eared section that pushes in and locks in is also one piece that the sleeve fits over, and it's threaded at the tip, and you could remove this tip right here, almost like a nut. You could remove this nut if you wanted to and take this off and change the ball bearings if you decide that they're damaged, or maybe you want to put a little bit of grease on them or a little bit of oil, get better access to the ball bearings. But good construction, steel spring guide, very durable, very reliable. I'll set this to the side. Now we'll keep digging into the lower receiver. I'll do the motor next. Now the motor's fairly simple. It's got 2 Phillips at the bottom here. Remove the plate, make sure to don't lose the screws, and here's your motor. We'll use a thin hex driver just to pull the motor out. So one thing I just noticed right now that could be the problem is this motor connection was not on all the way. It was a little loose. Now, this could be the issue when it comes to the rate of fire fluctuation. Now that I'm thinking about it, this connection was not completely solid. It was a little loose. And when you have a loose connection, that creates resistance in the electrical system, and that will cause the gun to kind of fluctuate in terms of amp supplying. So that could be the issue. When we put the gun back together, I'm going to go ahead and shoot it, and I'll see if that solves the issue. But right off the bat, this motor, it's got a CNC end bill. It's got, normally these little standoffs for the brush springs are plastic, but these are actually metal, which is nice. I do like that companies use color coordination for their standoffs and don't just put a little plus sign, or they don't just use like a very wearable Sharpie on top and the red will wear off after time. So good CNC end bill. It's got a CNC collar. It's got a good spring, and this is a D-type pinion. You can see where so you can see right here. Let me get a pointer. So you can see right here where the set screw is, and the D-type is going to have a flat section where that little hex grub screw is at. So if you want to upgrade to a different gear set and you want to use, let's say, like a helical gear set, you're limited to Soul Link or any type of helical gear set that offers D-type helical pinions. You can't use the Lonix one, unfortunately, because the Lonix one is for O-type only and it's pressed on. I believe this is a 19 TPA motor, so it's super torquey. And we'll put this to the side and we'll keep digging in. So before I take the gearbox out and I have the wiring more exposed, one thing that I kind of find is a big pet peeve of mine is on color coordinated wiring. I know that you could see that it's mostly a clear insulated jacket on it, and you can see where the wire is actually silver wire, so it supposedly carries current better. But I don't like how the only way to distinguish whether or not you're at a negative or a positive is this little heat shrink that's on each wire, even on the rear. Here at the Dean's plug, you can see where the heat shrink indicates whether it's the positive side or the negative side. If you do find yourself in a predicament where you can't figure out which one is which, I would recommend using a multimeter and connecting the negative to here and using the positive to connect to one of these on each side, and then checking for continuity. Now when you do that, you can tell that the continuity will be between the negative wire and the negative connection over here, just because the negative is going to be kind of one wire that connects to the battery. Trigger switch, we'll get to the trigger switch and I'll show you, but it's essentially going to be the trigger switch, when you pull it, is going to complete the positive circuit, and that's what's going to be providing the power. The negative is always going to be powered on. So when we get into the trigger switch, I'll show you that, but that's just my rule of thumb when it comes to trying to figure out which wire is which. Do a continuity check, start off with one wire and just tap the other side, and if you get a beep or whatever your multimeter chimes with, then that's how you know you have a negative or if you have a positive, depending on how your gun is set up. So let's keep digging in. Now, a quick note, when removing the magazine release, it's going to be a 1.3. Gearbox, and here we go. So right off the bat, it's got W cage bearings, or C cage, China cage, W cage, whatever cage, cheap cage bearings. I've never seen these actually blow up, so I'm going to say that they're okay, but obviously I'm going to recommend upgrading to a J cage bearing because they're the best in my opinion. Just looking at this, it's got 2mm screws that hold it together. We already removed the spring from the rear. You can get a better look at the wiring here where there's a small little signal wire that goes to the MOSFET from the trigger contacts. But let's go ahead and take these screws out and we'll show the internals. All right, now let's pop this bad boy open. My favorite way to do it is I always like to use a flathead and put it in between the gearbox and the flat section of the bevel gear and just kind of pry up a little bit. That breaks it free, and then using some sort of 2mm or 2.5mm pushing down on the sector, and that essentially holds the gears in place. All right, let's take this spring off. Take the compression parts out. We'll cover those in a bit. So right off the rip, the reason I like this gun so much, and I recommend it to everybody as they're like, hey, what's a good gun out of the box? What's a good gun out of the box? What gun doesn't need a lot of work? The reason I like this gun so much is because it comes with a SHS style full metal rack piston. It's got a polymer piston head, which isn't bad, but it does have a good O-ring. I always recommend upgrading to a Viton O-ring. It expands a little bit more, creating a greater seal, but the stock O-ring is actually pretty good. There's nothing wrong with using a polymer piston head. I like using a polymer piston head because it offers less weight compared to a metal one. And the one thing I hate the most is you buy a fancy, nicely polished cylinder, and I'm not going to use this one as an example because it's stock. Let's say you buy an aluminum piston head and you buy a nice polished steel or aluminum cylinder. You risk the chance of essentially having the piston head scrape on the inside of the cylinder, and that can create gouges. And if there's gouges, then that means that there's metal in there, and if there's, let's say, a piece of metal that's sticking up out of a gouge, it could start tearing into your O-ring. So I always just like using a polymer piston head, and there's some good ones out there. Lonex makes a good one. There's a couple other brands. I think Action Army makes a good one. So I like using a polymer piston head. The compression parts, though, they're not bad. It's got a polymer cylinder head, which it's in there pretty good. So it does have some, yeah, it's got a good seal. You know, it's not like it's leaking out or anything. The nozzle, it unfortunately does not have an O-ring. It's got a good seal on it, so I think it should be okay. I would definitely recommend upgrading to a O-ring air nozzle. So I like testing it to where the tappet plate is sitting on the front face of the cylinder. That almost replicates kind of a full nozzle extension, which is how it's going to be when it fires. And you can get a good compression test this way. So I got the air nozzle fully extended. I got the holding tappet plate. I'm going to push down on it, and let's see how long we can hold that tooth there. So it's slowly compressing, but it's still holding pressure, and the amount of pressure I'm putting on it as well is a lot. So when the gun is going to fire, it's not going to be holding the piston at a pressurized point. It's going to be just expelling all the volume out. So in my opinion, the compression parts aren't that bad for them being a stock polymer cylinder head, a non-O-ring polymer air nozzle, and a bronze kind of not that polished cylinder. You can see in there the marks of where they use the machining to make this piece. So not a bad piece. If I were to upgrade it anything, I would upgrade the cylinder to a full cylinder to maximize that 363mm inner barrel, and I would definitely get a O-ringed air nozzle. That's one thing for sure. Now, while I have the air nozzle out, let's go ahead and measure it so we can get you guys a good measurement to be able to look for air nozzles that are compatible with this. You're looking at about 21.20 on the air nozzle. 21.20, 21.21. That's about the length. So I would recommend using 21.25. I know that there's some brands that make 21.4s or 21.2s. If you can find a 21.2, that would probably be the best. But you could probably get away with using a 21.25 or a 21 flat. If you use a 21 flat, you might risk the chances of losing air compression when the nozzle is fully extended, because it's not going to be making contact with the bucking. So I would recommend a 21.25. So let's go ahead and put this away and move on to the gears. So the gears, we'll take them out. So right here you can see where it says King Arms. It says 18-1 King Arms. So these are King Arms 18-1 gears. They are, let's see, they are steel. So they're going to be pretty durable. They look to be actually laser cut, which is nice, because some steel gears are, I'm not sure what the process is called, but it's essentially just getting powder, putting it in a mold, and then pressing it to where it superheats itself and forms a gear set. That's how some gears are made, not all of them. The one problem with that is it becomes porous. But a laser cut, they're basically getting a piece of metal, a solid sheet, and just laser cutting the outline, and then the top section of this gear is pressed into the lower section. Same thing with this gear, the sector gear. It's got these two set screws, or these two screws that are holding the top section that grabs the piston to the bottom section that is rotated by the spur. And the bevel gear is the same way, where this part where the motor touches and the anti-reversal latch touches, there's this little section right here where the spur gear makes contact with. This piece is pressed into this outer piece, this flat piece. So I haven't seen any of these gears delaminate on these guns, so you don't really have to worry about that. I will say that they are a little over greased, but for stock, that's not too bad. If you do want to upgrade to an optical MOSFET or an optical trigger board, definitely want to degrease them and apply a new layer of grease that doesn't spray that much, because grease on top of the optical sensor will cause miscalibrations. Now, the gearbox itself is actually pretty reinforced. The one downside is if you use a gate titan or any type of MOSFET that has a top board that sandwiches on, you're gonna have to remove this ledge and this material right here. It's gonna be too high for the gearbox to sandwich back on if you're using any type of optical board that has a top board on top, like a gate titan. If you're using a gate aster, that's fine. You can just remove this section, right, this little piece right here, this little strip. You could just remove this little strip right here and put the sticker down, and you should be okay. But if you're going to use a gate titan, you're probably going to have to remove this ledge right here, or this little spur shroud, and this ledge to a certain degree, because the arm of the board is going to come out to about halfway, and that's what's going to cycle detect the sector gear essentially. Now the trigger contacts, I can see where they're sandwiched pretty close together. Let's see if I can get a shot right here. You can see where they're sandwiched pretty close together, so you don't have to worry about them spreading apart over time. Now, this is using the same thing I mentioned before, where the negative wire is one wire. So you can see where the negative wire goes from the motor directly over the board and directly to the Dean's connection. The positive wire is using the trigger contacts as a middle point, and you can see where the circuit is already complete right here. So the positive wire is going to be powered on. This little signal wire is going to be where the trigger contacts make contact. When those trigger contacts make contact, it's essentially telling this MOSFET, hey, the circuit's closed, send voltage. So it's going to close the circuit when you pull the trigger. The MOSFET is going to release voltage that's already in these wires, and then it's going to fire the gun. I do believe that loose motor connection that I pointed out earlier is the issue when it comes to real sluggish fluctuation in RPS. I will try it again with the motor connection firmly snugged on there. I would definitely double check that whenever you get any new airsoft gun. It could happen on any airsoft gun, not just this one in particular, but almost all airsoft guns use the same motor connections and the same wiring setup, just in different layouts or different designs, but it's all the same concept, if you could say that. So I would just make sure that these are snug on the actual motor connections. Sometimes you'll come across like P90s or AUGs where the wire is directly soldered onto the motor connection. That's cool. You know, you don't have to worry about creating a lot of resistance, but when it comes to taking a motor off or upgrading, it's kind of a pain in the butt because you got to desolder and then resolder. But always check your motor connections. It's pretty simple. So this is pretty much the internals of this gun. Now, I do recommend this gun a lot to people because of what it comes with. It's got really nice gears, good compression. It's got a pretty much very compatible version 2 gearbox that's pretty reinforced. It's got this nice back wall. It's got that additional raising and this additional brace for the gears and everything. So I do recommend this gun a lot. The motor is one thing for sure. Not very many airsoft companies like to include good motors, and this motor, in my opinion, is perfectly fine stock. If I was willing to upgrade anything, I would definitely look into a O-ringed air nozzle, a definitely more polished cylinder, and maybe just a better MOSFET like a Jeftron or an Aster, something cheap. You know, this will work just fine, but it's always good to have programmability. So I would definitely do that, and it'll be drop-in as well if you use an Aster, because you just have to worry about this side. You don't have to worry about this side as much, just this little strip, which is not that hard to remove. This is the internals of the gun. I'm gonna go ahead and put it all back, and we'll take a final look at it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of semi-professional review on the EMG King Arms Block 2. I recommend this gun to a lot of people because of the price point, because of the build quality, and also the internals. Now, the internals are probably my favorite part just because you feel like you're paying for what you get. Not to bash on like VFC, for example, but I'm gonna bash on them a little bit. You pay like $400 or $500 for a gun like that, and you get internals that are not steel. They're molded. They have brittle plastics. The piston isn't even full metal. It's got molded spring guide that the ears break off, and you know, small stuff like that, and you're essentially just paying for a receiver. But for the EMG King Arms lines, I really like them because they come with these internals and they're great out of the box. Very minimal upgrades needed, if not no upgrades at all, if you're looking to just get this gun and rip it out of the box. There are other models that come with this exact setup. There's the this is the Daniel Defense Colt setup. So you got the Block 2 rail with the Colt receivers. They do have the Mark 18, and they do have the FSP with the Colt receivers. They have the Troy guns that come with the same internals, and they have the Lancer systems, I believe, that come with the same internals. I'll put a list down in the description of all the guns that come with these internals, because it's similar to the SEMA Platinum, where you have a good gearbox to base a lot of guns off of, and you just kind of make different guns using that internal system, which is nice, but at the same time you're kind of saturating the market. So there's good and bads, but right now we're just looking at the positives because this gun, you know, has everything that I look for in terms of price and performance. I want to give a huge shout out to evic.com for providing this gun for the channel. I'm going to be using this gun as the official test bench gun for a lot of internal review parts I'm going to be doing. You'll be seeing it a lot more when it comes to internal reviews. And if you guys made it to the end, leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one.